I have worked for Callum, the Duke of Ashenvale, for 11 years, and in that time I have watched him refuse 3 offers of marriage, dismiss 2 secretaries, and drive a land agent to early retirement. He is not a cruel man. He is precise, and precision frightens people who are accustomed to being forgiven for imprecision. I am a land steward by trade and by temperament, and the Duke and I have always understood each other on that basis. He expects correct work, and I provide it, and we do not waste words on anything that can be accomplished in silence. So when I tell you that Marin Doyle changed him, changed both of us, in ways I am still measuring, I want you to understand that I say this as a man who does not say things lightly. It began with the maps. The Duke of Ashenvale had been awarded the Highland Commission 3 years prior, a formal survey of the northeastern approach to his own estate, the disputed moorland corridor that ran from Loch Carnan to the Ashenvale boundary stones, nearly 40 square miles of bog and ridge and river cut that had been the subject of contested tenancy claims for 2 generations. His Grace had the training for it. Before he inherited the title, he had spent 6 years as a surveying commander in the Northern Territories, and his reputation for precision in that work was considerable. He had taken the commission with something close to relief, I thought. It was a problem he understood. It had edges. It could be solved. What slowed him was the base maps. The commission required that the new survey be laid over the existing cartographic record. The Doyle surveys, commissioned 22 years ago by the Duke's own father, completed by the cartographer Emmett Doyle and his team, and considered the authoritative record of that corridor ever since. His Grace had sent for the original documents through the commission office, and they had arrived in a sealed case the previous autumn. 16 sheets of parchment in Doyle's careful hand, the contour lines precise and the river courses beautifully rendered, the tenancy boundaries marked in a second ink of a slightly different weight. The problem was that they were wrong. Not careless wrong, not the ordinary drift of a survey done in haste. Wrong in a particular way that took His Grace 3 weeks to identify, and that, when he finally came to me with it on a November morning, his face was the color of the frost on the north window. The ridge elevation at the eastern approach, he said, setting the Doyle sheets on my desk and placing his own field notes beside them. Compare them. I compared them. The Doyle survey placed the ridge at 640 feet. His Grace's own measurements, taken in 2 separate sessions using 2 separate instruments, placed it at 712. That is a significant discrepancy, I said. It is a 72-foot discrepancy, he said, and it is not the only one. The river course at the northern boundary has shifted in the Doyle survey by approximately 3/4 of a mile from where it actually runs. There are 11 points of error I can identify. There may be more. I looked at him. He was standing very still in the way he stood when something had cost him sleep. The commission will want to know, I said. The commission built their entire tenancy record on the Doyle surveys, he said. Every boundary stone in that corridor was placed using these maps. If the surveys are wrong, the boundary stones are wrong, and the tenancy claims we have been administering for 20 years are wrong. The commission will not simply want to know. They will require a complete resurvey, and they will want to know how the errors were introduced and by whom, and whether Doyle was incompetent or worse. He paused. Emmett Doyle has been dead for 6 years. He cannot defend himself. That was the thing about His Grace that most people never reached. He was not merely precise. He was also fair, and fairness cost him more than precision did, because precision was a habit and fairness was a choice he had to make repeatedly against considerable pressure. There is a daughter, I said. I had checked the estate records when the Doyle case first came to the office. Marin Doyle. She managed her father's correspondence after his health declined. She may know something of how the surveys were conducted. Find her, he said. I found her in a village 14 miles south. in a two-room cottage that smelled of linseed oil and cold hearth ash, and the particular dry mineral scent of parchment that has been handled every day for years. She was 31 years old, with dark, steady eyes and the hands of someone who works with small instruments, and she met me at the door with an expression that suggested she had been expecting someone official to arrive sooner or later, and was not surprised it had taken this long. "You are from the Duke of Ashenvale," she said. "His land steward, yes, Declan Hart. I expected the commission office." "We are working in concert," I said, which was not precisely true but was not precisely false either. "May I come in?" The interior of the cottage told the story plainly enough if you knew how to read it. Her father's survey equipment, the theodolite, the measuring chains, the drafting tools, were arranged on a long work table along the south wall. Beside them, in a stack held down by a smooth river stone, were sheets of parchment covered in a hand that was not Emmett Doyle's. I could see that immediately. The letter forms were different, smaller and more compressed, the contour lines slightly finer. There were perhaps 40 sheets in the stack. The Doyle Commission had produced 16. I looked at the stack, and then I looked at Marin Doyle, and she looked back at me with those steady dark eyes, and nothing more needed to be said about who had produced the original work. "How long?" I asked quietly. She was still for a moment. Then she said, "He was ill for the last 3 years of the commission. He could manage the correspondence and some of the boundary calculations, but the field work and the drafting, no." She did not say it with grief, particularly. She said it as a statement of what had been true. I completed the surveys. "Under his name." "Who would have hired me?" she said simply, not bitterly, simply. I had no answer for that because it was plainly true. The commission engaged contractors by reputation and by record, and Marin Doyle had neither, not under her own name. And the errors. Something shifted in her face. The errors are in his early work. The sections he completed in the first 2 years, before the illness progressed enough that he would accept my corrections. I have the corrected versions here. She touched the stack. I have had them here for 6 years. I wrote to the commission twice offering to provide them as supplementary material to the record. I was told the record was considered complete. I looked at the stack of 40 sheets, and I thought about the Duke standing in my office at 7 in the morning with frost on the window and 6 years of effort toward a land survey that was working from wrong foundations. And I thought about 3 men who had gone into the Highland Territory on an expedition 6 years ago and had not all come home. "Miss Doyle," I said, "I should like you to come to Ashenvale." She came the following morning, with a case of her own and the stack of 40 sheets wrapped in oilcloth against the weather. I met her at the estate gate and brought her first to my own office, and told her, as plainly as I could, what she was walking into. "His Grace is a precise man," I said. "He will see immediately what you have done and what your father could not do. I ask you to be patient with him." "Why patient?" she asked. I considered how to say it. "He lost men," I said at last. "In the Highlands 6 years ago, a navigational decision made on the basis of the existing maps. He has not spoken of it to me directly, but I have worked for him for 11 years and I know what he carries." Her expression was unreadable. Was it the Eastern Ridge elevation? I looked at her. "The wrong elevation would put a man in the river cut in poor visibility," she said. "If he was navigating by the ridge and the ridge was 70 feet lower on the map than on the ground, he would reach what he believed was the correct altitude and find himself still in the gorge." "Yes," I said, "something of that kind." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I would not tell him that my corrected survey would have prevented it. That is not something a person can receive and do anything useful with." I looked at her for a long moment. "No," I said. "It is not." I took her to the map room. His Grace was already there. He had the Doyle sheets laid on the long table and was working through them with a steel rule and his own field notes, marking the discrepancies in pencil as he went. He looked up when we entered, and I watched him take in Marin Doyle in a single assessment. The way he always looked at things he was preparing to understand, and then his gaze moved to the oilcloth case under her arm. "Miss Doyle," I said, "she has supplementary material related to her father's commission." "How supplementary?" he said. "Perhaps," Marin said, "you might tell me what discrepancies you have found, and I will tell you whether I have addressed them." He looked at her steadily. Most people, when he looked at them like that, became immediately apologetic or explanatory. Marin Doyle simply returned the look. He picked up his pencil notes and read them aloud. The ridge elevation, the river course, 9 further points. She listened without writing anything down. When he finished, she set her case on the chair by the door, removed the oilcloth bundle, and placed the 40 sheets on the table beside his 16. "The eastern ridge," she said, separating 3 sheets and placing them in sequence. "Corrected to 714 feet, within 2 feet of your own measurement." He was still, then he placed his ruler on the sheet. "The northern river," she said, separating 2 more. "The actual course, as surveyed in the 2nd year of the commission, when the silt diversion had already occurred." "These are not your father's hand," he said. "No." "How much of the commission is in this hand?" 31 of the 40 sheets." He set the ruler down. He did not ask her to explain it. He was, as I have said, a precise man, and I believe he had already worked through the arithmetic of what this meant, the dates, the illness timeline, what the commission office would have required and what it would have accepted, and arrived at the answer without assistance. "Why did you not bring these to the commission directly?" he said. "I wrote twice," she said. "I was told the record was complete." "You should have written again." "Perhaps," she said. "I am writing again now." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he sat down at the table, not dismissing her, but settling in the way he settled when a problem had become interesting, and said, "Walk me through the river survey. The notation in the northern section uses a marking I haven't seen before." She sat down across from him and began to explain. "I left them to it. I will not pretend that I did not listen from the corridor on occasion during those first 2 days. It is the prerogative of a land steward to know what is happening in his own estate office, and what was happening was this. They worked. They worked with the particular focused quiet of 2 people who are equally serious about the same problem, which is a form of intimacy I have come to recognize over 11 years in service, and which is rarer than most people suppose. His Grace asked questions, not rhetorical questions, not test questions, the genuine kind, the kind a man asks when he does not know the answer and understands that the person across the table does. Marin answered them directly, and when she did not know something, she said so, and explained what she did know and how it bordered on the gap, which was, I thought, more useful than certainty. On the 2nd afternoon, I brought them both tea and set it on the corner of the table, and was about to retreat when His Grace said, without looking up from the sheet he was tracing, "The eastern approach, Miss Doyle. Is there any variation in the ridge elevation along the full length, or is the error consistent?" "It varies," she said. "The Doyle survey, my father's section, used a single benchmark from the 1st year. The error compounds as you move east." She reached across the table and placed her finger on the sheet without hesitation. "Here, the gorge mouth." His Grace set his pencil down. "The gorge mouth," he said. "Yes," she said. She did not say anything further. She did not add anything about 6 years ago, or navigational decisions in poor visibility, or anything of that kind. She simply removed her finger from the sheet and picked up her tea. He sat for a long time without moving. He is not a man who shows very much on his face. I have known him for 11 years, and I can count the number of times I have seen him visibly moved on one hand, with fingers remaining. But he sat with his hands flat on the table and his head bent slightly, and I understood that what was moving through him was not grief, exactly, because I believe he had done his grieving in the years immediately after. It was something closer to a knot releasing. Something he had held knotted for 6 years because he had believed, in the absence of any better explanation, that the error had been his reading of the maps, his decision to proceed, his navigation. And now the maps themselves were wrong and had been wrong from the beginning, and the man who had made them wrong had been dead for 6 years and had a daughter sitting across the table who had spent 6 years trying, quietly and without success, to correct the record. "Miss Doyle," he said after a time. "Yes. I am sorry you were not heard sooner." She was quiet for a moment. "I am sorry it was needed." That was all that was said. It was, as I have noted, a precise form of exchange, and it was enough. They worked for another week before the commission inspection was due. I managed the correspondence and the logistics. Marin drafted the summary comparison document. The corrected survey laid methodically against the original, every discrepancy noted and measured, the source of each error identified without blame and with reference to the timeline of the elder Doyle's illness. His Grace reviewed it 3 times. On the 3rd review he made no corrections. "It is exact," he said, which was from him the same as saying it was exceptional. I watched him, during those days, become something slightly different from what he had been when Marin Doyle arrived at the estate gate. It is difficult to describe, because it was not a dramatic change. His Grace did not become demonstrative or verbose or given to expressions of feeling. He was, in almost every outward respect, precisely the same man he had always been. But there was something he had been bracing against for 6 years that he was no longer bracing against, and without that habitual tension, his attention had a different quality to it, warmer, less defended, more capable of landing on a thing and staying there. The thing it landed on, with increasing frequency, was Marin Doyle. I am a land steward, not a poet, and I will not attempt to describe it in terms that do not suit me. I will say that I observed the following in the course of that 2nd week. His Grace brought his own tea to the map room without being reminded. He twice lingered at the door when he might have left. On one occasion, he came into my office on what was ostensibly a question about the commission schedule, and instead stood at the window for 3 minutes looking at the courtyard, where Marin was cross-checking the boundary stones, and then went back to the map room without asking his question. I said nothing. It was not my place to say anything. On the evening before the commission inspection, I found them both still in the map room at 9:30. The candles had burned low. The corrected survey was complete, rolled and sealed and ready on the shelf. They were not working. They were sitting on opposite sides of the table with the remnants of the supper I had sent in between them, and His Grace was talking, which was, as I have said, not something he did with ease or frequency, and Marin was listening with her chin in her hand and her eyes on his face. I collected the tray and left. The commission came the following morning. 3 men from the Edinburgh office, accompanied by their own surveying consultant, a brisk man named Arnaud who had the bearing of someone who expected to find errors and was prepared to be severe about them. They assembled in the map room, and His Grace laid the corrected survey on the table and presented the comparison document, and Arnaud worked through it in silence for 20 minutes while the Edinburgh men watched. I stood to the side. Marin stood near the door. "This is extraordinary work," Arnaud said at last, without looking up. "The methodology, the benchmark recalibration, the river course correction, this is not a supplementary adjustment. This is a complete resurvey." "Yes," His Grace said. "Who conducted it?" His Grace looked at me. I looked at Marin. She was watching the table with an expression that was entirely neutral, entirely controlled, and entirely familiar to me by now as the expression she wore when she was waiting to see what would happen. "Miss Marin Doyle," His Grace said clearly into the room. "She completed the survey in the final 3 years of her father's commission and has maintained the corrected record for 6 years since." He paused. The commission was twice informed that a corrected version existed, and twice declined to receive it. I would suggest that the commission might want to account for that decision in its report. Arnaud looked up from the sheets. He looked at Marin. He looked at his Grace. The record will need to be reissued, he said slowly, under the name of the surveying cartographer of record. It will, His Grace said. I expect that is Miss Doyle's name. There was a long pause in the room. The Edinburgh men exchanged a look. Arnaud tapped his fingers once on the table and then nodded, a short, precise movement that I recognized as a man acknowledging a point he had not expected to concede. I will require a formal statement of work completed, Arnaud said, addressing Marin directly for the first time. Dates, methods, instrumentation. Can you provide that? I can provide it today, Marin said. After the commission party had withdrawn to the drawing room for the midday meal, I found His Grace in the corridor outside the map room. He was standing still in the way he stood when a thing had resolved, and he was not yet certain what came next. That was well done, I said. It was overdue, he said. He looked at the map room door. She should have been heard 6 years ago. She is heard now. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I should like to offer her the estate cartographer position. The survey work in the southern quarter has been contracted out at considerable expense and considerably less quality for the past decade. She is better than anyone I have engaged. He paused. That is the practical reason. And the other reason, I said, because I have known him for 11 years and it is occasionally my function to ask the question he has not quite said aloud. He looked at me steadily. She did not treat the gorge mouth as something I should feel guilty about, he said. She treated it as a problem that had a source and a correction. I am not certain I have met anyone else who would have done that. I considered this. No, I said, I don't believe you have. He was still for another moment. Then he said, do you think she would accept? I think, I said carefully, that you ought to ask her yourself. I will not tell you what was said between them in the map room that afternoon, because I was not there and I did not listen at the door. I am a land steward, and there are limits to my professional curiosity, and some things are rightly conducted in private. What I will tell you is that Marin Doyle did not leave Ashenvale that evening as she had planned. She wrote to the village to have her remaining belongings collected the following week. When I asked her, the next morning, if she had questions about the terms of the position, she said she had discussed the terms with His Grace and found them satisfactory. And the other matter, I said, because I am apparently not entirely above asking. She looked at me with those steady dark eyes, and the corner of her mouth moved in a way that I had not seen before on her face. A small, quiet, real thing. Also satisfactory, she said. The reissued commission survey went to Edinburgh the following month, bearing on its cover sheet the name Marin Doyle, cartographic surveyor, Ashenvale Estate, with a notation that the work had been completed in the period between the 14th and the 22nd year of the current reign, and that the corrected record superseded the previous document in all respects. The Highland Commission formally acknowledged the correction and filed an internal report on the process by which supplementary corrections had previously been declined. I do not know what consequences, if any, followed from that report. I know only that the boundary stones in the northeastern corridor were correctly placed the following spring, and that the tenancy disputes that had run for 2 generations were resolved by midsummer, and that the gorge mouth in the eastern approach was charted accurately for the first time in the public record. I know also that on the evening the corrected survey was returned from Edinburgh with the Commission's formal acceptance, His Grace and Marin were in the map room together, as they most evenings were by then, and I sent in the supper tray and a bottle of the good claret, and neither of them came out until the candles had burned entirely down. There is, I understand, to be a private ceremony in the spring. I have been asked to serve as a witness. I have said yes. I have worked for Callum, the Duke of Ashenvale, for 11 years, and I have watched him refuse 3 offers of marriage and drive a land agent to early retirement. And I have concluded, after some reflection, that what we both required in our different ways, was not someone who would receive our precision with patience exactly, but someone who shared it, who understood that a correct measurement is not a cold thing but a careful one, and that getting the record right finally is its own kind of love. Maren Doyle knew that from the beginning. She had been keeping the correct record for 6 years, waiting for someone who would finally receive it. The Duke of Ashenvale received it, and everything else she had to offer besides.